Welcome to Power and Purpose. Today, Nathalie and I are delighted to be joined by Sviatlana Tsikhanouskaya, the leader of the democratic opposition in Belarus. The former teacher and stay-at-home mom assumed this role ahead of the 2020 elections in Belarus when her blogger husband and other opposition leaders were jailed or forced into exile. Although Alexander Lukashenko dismissed her as a housewife and claimed a landslide victory in widely seen fraudulent polls, Sviatlana was and remains a fierce political opponent. From exile in Lithuania, she unified the opposition and led the largest democratic movement in the country's history. She established the United Transitional Council of Belarus to coordinate the opposition and is actively continuing the campaign for a democratic future, the release of over 1,200 political prisoners, and humanitarian aid for her country. Sviatlana, welcome to the podcast.
Hello, everybody. Good to be here with you.
Wonderful, Sviatlana. So let me jump straight in by asking you a couple of questions really about Belarus and your struggle, really. So particularly since Russia's large-scale invasion of Ukraine began, on the one hand, attention to Belarus has increased, and on the other hand, it has decreased. It has increased in the sense that as it has become increasingly clear that Russia is intent in a sense, recreating its empire, it is very clear that Ukraine is one of the targets and that Belarus, in Putin's eyes, has already been pocketed as one of the colonies. And of course, Lukashenko is very much part of that endeavor. So on the one hand, it has raised the sort of profile and relevance of your struggle for democracy and therefore also for peace in Belarus. But on the other hand, it has overshadowed it. Precisely because all of the attention has been revolving around Ukraine. So I'm wondering if you could speak a little bit about how you understand the connection between the war in Ukraine and the fight for freedom and democracy in Belarus, and how you have navigated this struggle since Russia's large-scale invasion of Ukraine.
For me, it is so clear that Belarus was for so long time like gray spot on the map of Europe that not really many people understand that fate of Belarus and Ukraine are intertwined. We are actually fighting the same enemy with Ukrainians, imperialistic ambitions of Russia. Russia doesn't see neither Ukraine nor Belarus as separate, independent, sovereign states. They see us as their satellites, servants, to Russia. And they don't think, Russians don't think that Belarusians, Ukrainians have the right to choose our future by ourselves. Ukrainians want to return actually to European family of countries the same. Belarus always belonged to Europe, and now we want European future for our country. But regime made Belarus country co-aggressor, and Lukashenko allowed Russian troops to invade Ukraine from our territory, but Belarusians didn't agree with this. Only 4% support sending Belarusian troops into the war. Hundreds of Belarusian volunteers fight for Ukraine, shoulder to shoulder with Ukrainians, and many citizens resist the war from inside Belarus. And of course, our position is clear that peace on Ukraine must be done on Ukraine's terms. And we fully understand that victory of Ukraine will affect situation in Belarus as well, because victory of Ukraine will weaken Putin's regime and hence Lukashenko's regime. And it will be a moment of opportunity for Belarusian people again, to resist inside the country and to get rid of Lukashenko's regime. So all these 30 years of Lukashenko's government, he dragged us into Soviet Union past, while Belarusian people want to go to the future, to European future.
Yeah. And by the way, are you confident that that victory is going to come?
I think that there is no other choice, neither for Ukraine nor to the rest of the world. Because now Ukrainian war is not only about Ukraine, it's not only about, Belarus, it's about the entire region. If we show regimes, tyrants, terrorists, that democracy doesn't have enough power to resist, So these regimes will split over, because dictatorship is like cancer. Until you cut it to very last cell, it will spread further and further. So that's why victory of Ukraine, it's part of security architecture of the whole region. And it will be the fact that democracy has teeth, democracy has power and boldness, to counter dictators.
Yeah. By the way, I love this this image of dictatorships being like cancer, and the cancer spreading actually makes me think of another very uncomfortable connection going on here. As we know, there are growing, let's say, illiberal and perhaps even authoritarian trends in Western societies as well. I'm wondering how you have handled and how you look at the connection between the president of the United States and Lukashenko. I'm not trying to sort of imply here that Trump is a dictatorship, but to be very, very clear, I mean, it is clear that he doesn't have many problems in dealing with dictatorial leaders, whether that is Putin or whether that is Lukashenko itself. So, how has the Trump factor affected the way in which Belarus pursues its struggle for freedom?
First of all, I have to say that, for all these 5 years since our uprising in 2020 started, relations with the United States always were vital. And we have been enjoying bipartisan support for Belarus through Belarus and Democracy Act, for example. There is support from administration and Congress. We understand that Trump is more transactional. So our task is to get him interested in Belarusian case. And his interest might be to bring change for Belarus, to be like peacemaker, to be like UN in Belarus. And of course, we already saw the impact of American leadership in very concrete terms, because thanks to firm actions of President Trump and his team, dozens of political prisoners were released from Belarusian prisons, including my husband, Sergei. And this was not just politics. These were real lives saved, families reunited after years of separation. And of course, for me personally, I will never forget the moment when my children finally saw their father again. And for this, I'm deeply grateful. And I know how many other families feel the same way. But at the same time, we must be very clear about Lukashenko. He is not changing. He remains a dictator at home, destroying any independent voices, closing media, criminalizing even the use of the Belarusian language, for example. My message in Belarusian case to Washington is very direct. Any engagement with Lukashenko must be principled. There can be no rewards or no concessions until all political prisoners are freed, repressions are stopped, and Belarus has a real path to new democratic elections. Firmness and unity are the only language. For us, it's extremely important transatlantic unity. I mean, European and American one. So, as I say, let President Trump be President Trump. He wants to bring peace, all over the world. He sees his mission in this. Go ahead. So many people will be grateful for his achievements. But again, there shouldn't be signs for dictators that they will be appeased, that it's normal what dictators are doing. So, but through releasing of people, this success in releasing Hamas hostages, it's really significant. But afterwards, we have to understand that the USA is a democratic country, where human rights are respected. And for all these years, repressed nations always looked on the USA, because it was like our lighthouse, ahead, and we just always told that we want the same situation as in the USA. But what I see, it was the first part of your question about changing of the moods in democratic world, is that it's really so. I see how propaganda, total propaganda, poisoned the minds of ordinary people. That they persuade people who live in democracy that, look, why do we have to interfere into nations who have problems with the human rights? Like, enjoy your lives. You live wonderfully in democracy. Why do you have to care about Belarus, about Ukraine? But this is rotten perception, because dictatorship in one country, might infect other people, with dictatorship. And sometimes I even hear that, oh, maybe we need to have like smart or light dictatorship in democratic countries because it's easier to rule, it's easier to make decisions. But people don't always understand what it means to lose democracy. It's so easy to lose, but it's so difficult, to gain, to get it back. It costs lives, it costs freedom, it costs tears. So cherish what you have. Praise your leaders who are bold, who are principled, who are decisive, and stay addicted, to the values that your countries, your nations are based on.
Absolutely. Well, and you certainly embody many of those values. And Natalie and I are keen to get more into that and the details of your struggle. You talk about living in a dictatorship. I suspect many of our listeners have never actually met somebody from Belarus. They will not have visited Belarus. And so I'm interested in hearing about your personal story. What was it like growing up as a child in a country like Belarus? Could you talk about politics at home with your family? And I also understand that you, like me, benefited from the experience of studying abroad. That you, among other children who had been affected on the margins of the Chernobyl disaster, had the opportunity to go to Ireland, which then opened up English and a broader world to you. So, would be interested in hearing about the early life of Svetlana, both the good and the bad of being a child in Belarus, and then this experience that got you out of Belarus for the first time.
Uh, Look, I was born in the Soviet Union, and we enjoyed 3 years of independence in Belarus until Lukashenko came to power. And I have to say that, of course, the story of every nation is different. In the case of Belarus, people after collapse of Soviet Union were so poor. There were so many problems that people were just not interested in politics. People were surviving. And in this situation, people chose a very populistic person, Alexander Lukashenko, who promised, better life, European perspectives, a better economic situation. People just believed and voted almost blindly, honestly speaking. And very fast, Lukashenko managed to build a dictatorship that is based on military support. He built his personal security apparatus. He dismantled parliament. He started to rule on the basis of fear. And step by step, it's like in a swamp. You are not realizing that you are in the dictatorship. But once, if your interest, becoming not the interest of government, just you realize that you don't have rights, that laws are not working for ordinary people, that you don't have voice. If you object to anything, you will be landed in prison immediately. So, and our parents' generation, they really couldn't resist because, as I said, they were surviving. But new generation who maybe started to travel to see how other countries live, they started to understand that our country, with wonderful people, with good geographic position, could live much, much better. But this is because of this dictatorial leadership who is tying us to Russia. They're not giving us opportunity to develop. Of course, you mentioned Ireland, and possibility for me to see other countries was a real huge impact on me. And many people from children from Belarus actually visited different countries, Italy, Spain, Germany, and they brought their experience back to Belarus. And when they grew up, they understand that, look, something is wrong with our country, because many after Soviet Union countries, developed much, much better than Belarus. Like, let's take Poland or Lithuania. They gained their independence from Russia, and they just, economically developed. People feel wonderfully enjoying democracy. And our country, because of poor government, because of poor management, are stuck in the Soviet Union times. So, of course, I remember my first visit to Ireland when I saw, I was a child, I saw shops full of food and clothes. This is what we never had in Belarus. I saw smiling people in Belarus. People were surrounded with all those problems, trying to survive, and didn't have like a wish or desire, to smile or to greet each other. And I was shocked by kindness of people, where they want to take care of others, not only about themselves. So it was like cultural shock for me. Of course, you start to compare with what you have in Belarus. And that's why the internet came. And step by step, a new generation realizes that, look, we can live much better and we want better future for our children. So that's why I insist so much while communicating to democratic world that while punishing Lukashenko for his crimes against humanity, for human rights abuses, we have to keep borders open for people to have possibility to travel, to keep this people-to-people contacts. Because isolate Lukashenko, don't isolate people. This is our credo, because it's Lukashenko's propaganda always say that, nobody needs you in the West. It's rotten West. We have to keep closer to Russia. But there is another world, democratic world, wonderful world. And people have to see this world only just to compare.
Sviatlana, can I tell you a story? Actually, Amanda doesn't know this, and I can't remember, Sviatlana, if I ever happened to sort of tell you. There is by now, no longer child, because he has actually just turned 18, Belarus boy who he was one of those Chernobyl boys that used to come. He was an orphan, and he used to come to Italy, staying with a family that is very close to ours. He actually then fell ill. He basically had cancer. And in that period, he kept on coming back. It was a real struggle to getting, the Belarus regime to allow him to continue to come back. But it was incredible to watch him, indeed, as you were saying, kind of open his eyes up to a different world. And, the amazing part of this story is that on the one hand, he has now in September just turned 18, and he is no longer under the tutelage of the state, and he managed to escape. He used to only be able to come here with a guardian, and he has now managed to escape. So he's now free. He's here. He's in Italy. He's here for good. But, and this is really what my question was, he is still really struggling with fear. Yeah. I mean, on the one hand, he's an incredibly brave boy, and, he's gone through so much. And yet, especially now that we see him a lot, I can so tell that he is just scared. Yeah. I mean, he is scared of what might happen to people that he still knows that are still in Belarus. So I'm just wondering I guess it's a kind of rather vague and perhaps slightly kind of, question that has to do more with emotions than with anything else. But how do you deal with that fear? Because fear is such a key component of a dictatorial regime. Yeah. I mean, they kind of instill it into your brain. And how do you deal with it? How do you overcome it?
Well, you're absolutely right. Fear paralyzes people. And when 2020 happened in Belarus, when we saw how people for several months in a row were deprived, were not afraid of the regime, we felt such a strength inside. And then we saw how regime brutally crushed people, put people in prisons, were beaten them, and we saw how fear was returning to people. Of course, regimes are based, they're built on the feeling of fear. Even those who are living in exile at the moment, and I have to remind that since 2020, up to 1 million Belarusians left Belarus because of repressions. We still have friends, relatives in Belarus, and people hiding their faces, even being abroad, because their relatives can be detained by this regime. So this lawlessness and this brutality of the regime already spreads on Europe, on other countries. Repressions became transactional. People are declared extremists and terrorists and put in Interpol list, and even while you are abroad and while traveling, you can be detained, by Interpol because you're in this red line terrorist list. So regime depriving Belarusians of their documents, of their passports. So people live in fear inside the country, people live in fear abroad, but this possibility when there is necessity to overstep your fear, to put like your global or national aims higher than your personal fear, this is real strength of the nation. Because, of course, it's easier to say, look, I'm afraid and that's why I'm not going to do anything. But when you understand that you're doing this for your children, for your country, you shouldn't actually concentrate on your personality, on your emotions. Just you have to work hard to bring attention to Belarus, to help people who are in trouble, to communicate to other governments and societies, even if you are scared.
Well, let's come to 2020 and how you became what you have described as a accidental politician or an accidental leader. And just one note for our listeners who are probably younger than us in many cases, we've referred to Chernobyl a couple times. For those who do not know, that was an explosion of a nuclear power plant in 1986 in what is now Ukrainian territory. And that led a number of charities to then follow up with children and others who were affected by that. But Sviatlana, you were working as an English teacher. You met your dashing husband, who was a nightclub owner. You had 2 children. You were living life. So, how do you go from that to becoming this globally known democracy campaigner?
My decision to step into politics was absolutely spontaneous. Never could imagine that I will be in politics. When my husband Sergei was jailed because he dared to run against the dictator, I took his place out of love to him, to my nation. I won that elections in 2020. The results were stolen. But what followed wasn't just about me. It was like national uprising and millions of people stood up together. I had to leave the country for my children's safety, but I continue to work because I know what we are fighting for, for dignity, for freedom, for normal life. And of course, we all want to return home to free and democratic country. And of course, it was difficult path, political path, because I started to learn everything from scratch. Maybe I'm lucky because the best politicians of this world were my teachers, presidents, prime ministers, ministers. But it was really, again, it's about fear. I was scared to meet high-ranked politicians because I didn't know how to behave. I didn't know protocol. And just I realized that I'm representing the whole nation, the voice of Belarusian people. But, when life puts you in such circumstances where you have to learn fast, where you have to overcome your emotions and fear, you're just doing this because you have to. You don't have a choice in this situation. And I have to say that, till now, I have this imposter syndrome. I haven't graduated from any political university. Sometimes I realize that maybe my knowledge is not enough for perfect communication, but I see how people respect my path. People respect Belarusian nation, and I'm so proud to represent Belarusians and their brave actions, their brave fight. Still, I'm not confident while speaking publicly or giving interviews. But, you have to do this. Just do. You have no choice. And that's why, of course, I wouldn't be able to do it myself. It's about my team. It's about Belarusians who are supporting me. You just realize that you are face, you are leader of wonderful nation, and this nation at last has a voice, and this voice has to be strong, has to be powerful, confident, and I'm trying to do my best.
So just for our listeners, and correct me if I have the facts wrong, your husband became a blogger and became a very popular blogger in Belarus, interviewing people about their lives, about what was happening in the country. He and a number of others then challenged Lukashenko, very active in the democratic opposition. Lukashenko put your husband and the others in jail. Your husband was not able to run from jail, so you ran in his place. Like you said, Lukashenko stole the election. You were then forced to go into exile into Lithuania, from where you launched this global campaign for Belarusian democracy. And your husband in 2021 was sentenced to 8 years in prison. And as you mentioned earlier, was just released this June after 5 years in jail. So just did I miss anything there? Is that the general timeline and how you ended up, in a sense, taking over what had been your husband's mission initially and turning it into a global campaign?
It's a short description.
The very short, condensed version for those who may not be as familiar with Belarusian politics as they should be.
A very long and complicated story.
Yeah, the only thing is that my husband was sentenced to 19 and a half years in jail. It's not 8. So the terms for activists, for brave Belarusians are, rather big, rather long. For example, one of my comrades, Masha Kolesnikova, she was sentenced to 11 years in jail. She's a woman who tore her passport when the regime tried to expel her out of the country. So, yeah, my husband, he spent 5 years in jail in solitary confinement, and 2.5 last years he was kept incommunicado. For those representatives of democratic society who don't know what is incommunicado, it means that he was in full isolation. Lawyer is not allowed to visit you, no literature, no parcels, no visits, no phone calls, no information. So you are like, you have nothing.
Wow.
You don't know what's happening, outside. No letters. And regime is doing this to break people out of prison, to raise them from public life and to persuade them that nobody cares about them. Look, you don't get letters. Lawyer is not visiting you. Everybody forgot about you. You are abandoned. You are forgotten. The world doesn't care. So this is how regime wants to break people inside the country.
Yeah.
Oh, inside the prisons, yeah.
Yeah, Sviatlana, I mean, coming back to this. So in a sense, this is a story about your husband, who is a male leader. And because of these circumstances, you then step in and you are a female leader. What is your sense of what you as a woman leader add to this? What are the main strengths that have come with you being the face of the democratic opposition as being a woman leader? And what are the challenges that you have had to face as a result of it, especially coming from a regime which is an extremely vertical, chauvinistic, indeed dictatorial regime, and normally dictatorships are led by men?
Well, and clearly a dictator who underestimated you and dismissed you as just a housewife.
So first of all, the fact that I was chosen as the leader of the democratic forces, actually as the president of Belarus, was a clear signal to the regime, first of all, who since the beginning told that our constitution is not for women. Women cannot lead the country. It's nonsense.
Right.
And Belarusians showed to the regime, look, it's possible. We are voting for a woman. And at that very moment, our women actually in 2020, they stood instead of our men, because it were first men who were beaten brutally, who were detained by the regime, and they didn't know, these policemen didn't know how to treat women who stand in beautiful white dresses, with flowers in front of this brutal policemen. We show that we are peaceful. We just want changes in the country. But then women also started to be detained. But maybe the most important Belarusian initiatives now are led by women. Women are multitasked. Women are maybe better in marathons, in long distance. We are not concentrated on our ambitions. Think more maybe like mothers. We want better for our children, and it means better for our country. We are not competing to each other. We are complementing each other. We want to help to each other. And of course, I don't want to say that men's world is worse, but it is more about competition. As for women, it's about supporting each other. And I'm so grateful, that I visited so many women's breakfasts or women's meetings where we can share not only political hints, we can go about the best clothes shops, but of course it was very big shift for Belarusian women because in post-Soviet Union countries, it mostly patriarchal societies where women's place in kitchen with children in churches, but not leading position. And now it became so evident that Belarusian women are not worse than Belarusian men, and in some extent are even better. That's why I think that after changes in Belarus, there will be no questions if women are on the same level as the men. We already proved this.
Yeah.
I cannot say that I had problems or challenges on the international arena. Being a woman, I never felt any humiliation or whatever because I was a woman. Some men looking on you from above, but they respect bravery. They respect our fight. So maybe it is somehow compensating the men's view on the women. But of course, I see that this attitude toward women is changing all over the world, and we see this women leadership movements, and we see how women supporting and helping each other. So the world is changing, and the women understand that we are not people of second range. We can do more. We are leaders. We are brave. Just we were always lack of space to show it.
Well, I think women helping women is important. And Sviatlana, I was telling Nathalie, my favorite memory of you was when I was working with President Biden in the White House, and he came to Poland in February 22, just a couple weeks after the war in Ukraine had started, March of 22, and gave a speech in Warsaw. You were there at the speech. I had very much been hoping to get the two of you together for a meeting in person, and unfortunately, we couldn't get the logistics sorted out, and I felt terrible. And President Biden's main assistant also felt terrible, and she said to me, "Let's get them on the phone." And so I was able to call one of your colleagues, and then I walked into President Biden's private office on Air Force One before the plane took off and handed him the phone and said, "Mr. President, I have Sviatlana on the phone." And he was so pleased to talk to you and to express his support for you and the Belarusian people. And I share that just as a small anecdote. It remains one of my proudest staffing moments from my time in the White House, of really being able to do something important and facilitate a conversation that I know the president wanted to have. And that was also very important to you at that point in your political leadership development and broader democracy struggle as well.
Oh, yes, Amanda, of course, I remember this story. And till now, we are so grateful to you because we understand that it was not necessary for you to do this for us. But so as your heart was also felt pain for our country, for our struggle, you made it for us as well. It was such important step, and that conversation actually in media, it was so interesting, showed that, wow, President Biden so seldom phoning to anybody. It might be something very urgent, phoning from plane. So this steps are so important, and sometimes people don't understand how impactful they are, what important role they are playing in connecting people. So and actually it was a movie that was shot about Belarusian fight. It is called The Accidental President, and this moment is shown there, so everybody who is interested can watch it. So, and there is a conversation with President Biden is shown there.
Sviatlana, coming back to your, I think, wonderful analogy there of women being better at marathons, the personal hardship that you have been through. I mean, of course, you were not the one in jail, but to know that your husband, your loved one, was, and you had to leave the country, you were with your children. How have you dealt with that very personal marathon? What have you done to keep yourself, in a sense, mentally healthy, physically healthy, where you were constantly, I can imagine, I can think of my husband being in jail. I don't know how I would deal with it. How did you deal with it? It's almost, I'm not trying to suggest here that it's worse being out of prison than being inside prison. But if it's your loved one that is incommunicado, it must be just such a horror to deal with.
No, of course, it's not easy to work knowing that your beloved is being tortured, is being humiliated physically and mentally in prison and psychologically, and you don't know when you will be released. But what you know is that you have to do everything possible to release him and other people as soon as possible. I have to say that, of course, this gap between those people who spent 5 years in jail and those who were fighting for these 5 years is really huge. Because while protests, while relocation or the beginning of the war in Ukraine, people who were free, we experienced emotions. Together we saw Bucha in Ukraine. Together we saw how Belarusians are being killed by this regime. Together we formed our government in exile. We always were communicating, coordinating our actions. And for people in jail, it was just short messages. The war has started. Elections in the USA or Russian ship was bombed, But there were no emotions in this. And I see how my husband, for example, has to learn so much about these 5 years. But I think I'm afraid that he will never be able to catch these emotions that we experienced through all these years. Of course, people after prison, they're exhausted physically, but most of them are not ruined, are not broken. Prison leaves deep marks. Sergei is still recovering his health. At the same time, he has immediately returned to what he has always done, speaking the truth about Belarus, supporting those who remain in prison, reminding the world that the tower fight is not over, and so on and so forth. But, for these 5 years, you're simultaneously working hard, trying to be everywhere in all the countries simultaneously, trying to arrange the work of democratic forces, trying to be a good mother as well, because, I really feel so sorry that I didn't manage to pay so much attention to my children. They were growing like grass themselves, all these years. And it's always a feeling of guilty for people in prison, guilty that the democratic world cannot do enough to help Belarusians to change our country, guilty that not all the institutions working properly, guilty when new people are detained. So it's always like such a huge burden on your shoulders, but you understand that you have to do this. Even, after my husband is released, I can fully enjoy this happiness because still there are so many children in Belarus growing up without their parents, many wives and husbands waiting for their loved ones. You feel guilty because your husband is with you. So that's why I just want to feel this moment of full happiness. When I'm not guilty, I don't feel guilty for everything around. Just when we can rebuild our country together, when we can hold new elections in Belarus, when people are happy returning home. But now my life looks like this.
Really is almost unimaginable what you have gone through. And as you alluded to earlier, I'm sure your heart has really been with the Israeli families over the last 2 years who have had their loved ones in prison. And I'm sure you also can relate to what they are going through in these recent days of reuniting with their loved ones. So, Sviatlana, we could continue to talk to you for many more hours. We like to end the podcast on a positive note. You were alluding just a minute ago to wanting to feel joy and happiness, and of course, that being a conflicted emotion given everything that you are still fighting for. But I'd like to ask you very simply and narrowly, tell us something that has brought you joy in the last week or so.
This will not be something personal. It's again about our fight, but seeing how people sometimes feel fatigued, that Belarus is a little bit abandoned, overshadowed, overlooked. Recently, I spoke with a young Belarusian volunteer who helps families of political prisoners, and she told me, we don't know when freedom will come, but we must live as if it is already near. That inspired me a lot. It reminded me that even in the darkest time, people find courage to care for one another. Even being themselves in big pain, they're trying to support other people whose grief is bigger. So my joy is not in big events, but in these small acts of solidarity. In small moments of happiness, hugging children or seeing families reunited. So, of course, we want more these moments in our lives. But I have to say that as long as people believe, there is a future for our country and for democracy globally.
I love that. There's lots of people that are facing struggles for democracy in their own country, feeling overwhelmed by the challenges that they face. And I think they can take inspiration from your resilience, your campaign, and your wise advice here.
And Sviatlana, actually listening to you, my 2-word takeaway actually from this conversation that has really struck me and that I'd love to leave our listeners with is that hope and courage are really the two sides of the same coin. And you are such a voice that speaks of courage. And it is that courage that you really embody that I think really leaves us with a sense of hope moving forward. So thank you so much for being on the show with us. Thank you, Sviatlana.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Everybody. Thank you.
Power and Purpose is an IE Insights podcast produced in association with IE University and Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies. Production and sound design by Reptile Studios. We'll be back soon with the next episode. Make sure you never miss an episode by subscribing to Power and Purpose wherever you get your podcasts.